So now we're going to continue and get those assets that were specified in the Vite docs injected into our template. So we're going to start in our Inertia middleware file, and what we're going to do is create a new type to represent these assets that we want to inject into our template. So what we've created here is a new struct type called page template assets. It has two fields, JS files and CSS files, and both of them are an array of strings that specify the JavaScript files we want to inject into the template and the CSS files we want to inject into the template. Now we're going to create a function that will help us to create a new page template assets struct. So what we've created here is a function called new page template assets. It's going to return a pointer to a page template assets struct. We'll create a new page template object, and then if we're in development mode, what we're going to do is append these two files to our JavaScript files property in that struct. And these are the two files that you can see specified here in step 2. We're specifically only setting the JavaScript files because we're only handling development mode for now. We're not thinking about production. Next, we're going to add these page template assets to our Inertia info struct. So our Inertia middleware knows where to look for these template assets. So here I've added the page template assets field to the Inertia info struct. And now I will add the initialization of that field to the register inertia adapter. Next, what we're going to do is take these page template assets and add them to the data that is rendered out of the Inertia middleware. So I'm just going to move this function and start adding stuff to this render data. So this is a mapping of strings to types. So what I've done here is added values to this string to type map, and basically we've added 3 fields: JS files, CSS files, and is development, and we just pass through the JavaScript files added to the page template assets, the CSS files added to the page template assets, and then we set the is development flag. This render data is going to get passed through to our page template so it can be used in rendering. Now we're going to hop in to our page template and make use of that render data that we have added. So what I've done here is added an if block to our template. It's going to check the is development flag that's passed into the render data, and if it's true, it's going to inject this script tag into the template, which is one of the things that Vite specifies we need when we're in development mode. And then for these next sections, I add a range block, and range is going to do the same thing it does in normal Go. So it's going to loop over that item. So I'm accessing the object that's been passed into the template with a dot. Then I'm getting the JS files array, looping over that, and then printing out a script for each JS file. And the value that's been pulled out of this range loop is going to be this dot. And then I do the same thing here for the list of CSS files. Lastly, I'm going to add a div that has the data page component value set inside it. I've realized I made a mistake with the CSS files. These need to be links. So now I have added that div that we expect with the ID of app and then a data page attribute. And one thing I want to jump back to is that the file that's specified on the Vite website about backend integration, this shouldn't actually be main.js. It should be this /src/main.jsx. And now that I have all of the render data from here being injected into our app.html template, I can start the dev server and give this a test. So now I'm expecting the same page that loads on the Vite web server, so 5173, to load on localhost port 3000, and you can see it loads as expected. So if I give this a refresh and just inspect some of these requests, you can see as we set up requests for static content, even though these are generated by the Vite build system, they are sent to localhost 3000, which then forwards them on to the Vite web server in development mode. Now I'll just do a quick recap of what I did, since this had a fair few steps. I'll just do it using the div tool. So we started out by adding some config to our Vite development server. The key bit being the origin, so all of the file paths that are generated by the dev server are going to appear to have originated from localhost 3000. To do that, with some config to our middleware, so we added a setting to forward requests for static files to the view public folder, and then in development mode we proxy requests to /source/assets to localhost 5173, and you can actually see that. So requests for source/pages, you can see, have been sent to 5173. That's where they're being resolved. And then in our middleware, we added this page templates assets struct type to hold the JavaScript and CSS files that we want to inject into our template. We created a function to create a new one of these structs. We added this new type to the fields in our Inertia info struct, and then we generate our render data so that it has these JavaScript and CSS files that we want to inject, as well as the isDevelopment flag. Then lastly, we use that render data in our template and inject the values using this dot operator. We also added the div with our app ID and a data page component, so that Inertia knows to load up the index component with the example prop, which means we get what we had earlier.